Elizabeth Leon is joining me today on the show, and I am so happy to connect with her. Elizabeth is the Director of Family Support for Redbird Ministries, but she also has her own ministry called The Journey of the Beloved, and she's the author of a book called Let Yourself Be Loved. So, Elizabeth, it's so nice to have you here with me. Why don't you just share with us a little bit about where you're from and what your family, where's your family from? Where do you live?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, we've connected a couple different times over the years, and it's a
Yep.
pleasure. I'm glad to get to know you more. I'm physically in Northern Virginia.
Mhm.
I'm a wife and a mother, Catholic writer, speaker, musician. That's the smallest of the three for sure. And I live here with my husband, Ralph, and we have 10 children between us. We're in a second marriage. I brought in five, he brought in four, and then we have our little boy, John Paul Raphael, who died in 2018 and is really the springboard and the heart of all of the ministry work that I now do. We have four grandbabies and one on the way, a couple cats. So life is full, and we're actually,
Yes.
I can say, in a very peaceful season with two
Mhm.
families of trauma bringing a lot of hurt and broken kids together. It has not always been calm, but we are in a relatively calm season. I have one child at home still. She's a senior in high school.
Wow. Okay. My oldest is a senior, so I'm just like, I'm right
Yeah.
behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they range right now. Our living kids range from 17 to 34 and pretty much
Wow.
everything in the middle.
Amazing.
Um,
Amazing.
Yeah, and like as you mentioned, I'm the director of family support for Redbird Ministries, which is a Catholic grief support ministry for families of child loss, all ages from pregnancy loss through adulthood. We serve so many people all over the country, all over the world, and we work both in diocese. We have chapters that exist within a diocese, or we also have a virtual family pathway. If you don't have on the ground support near you, you can connect with us. And we have
Mm.
lots and lots of different ways to find support, including our upcoming Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day event that you will be speaking
Yes.
at.
Yes. Yeah. October is always just a special time to offer support for those families that have been through that experience, as we both have.
Yes.
But today the topic for this month of September is surrender. I prayed about these topics before I came into the year, and for some reason, September and surrender went together. I imagine a little bit might have something to do with Our Lady of Sorrows and that being her month and her example for us. But you jumped on that topic and said that that's a good one for me.
That's what
So
I want.
that's the one I want to talk about. So I would love to understand more a little bit about why surrender is just so meaningful to you and a part of your story.
Sure. Okay. So surrender, in order to surrender, I think you have to have three things in place. And then I'll dive into
Hmm.
how I got to be so passionate about it. You really need to know, first of all, who you're surrendering to. You need to have a good sense of who is God, who's his character, what's his character. Um, so knowing the Father, first of all, and then secondly, knowing who you are to him,
Mm.
like really grounding your identity as the beloved son or daughter of God. So those two things have to be that you have to start with that. I feel like it's nearly impossible to have authentic surrender unless you can begin with those. The promise of who God is and who does he say I am. And then finally, the third piece is redemptive suffering. You know, that my suffering matters. There's a purpose. It's hard to surrender to something if I think it's meaningless, if all it is agony and pain. So, our Redbird podcast is called It's Not for Nothing. So, the third one is really, it's not for nothing. It's the power of redemptive suffering. So, it is worth surrendering to this because in that process, fruit will come from it, grace will come from it, and not just for us, for all
Yes,
those that we love. So, those are sort of my like prerequisites to get into before
absolutely. Yes.
we can even consider, can I surrender? Kind of need to know those things are in place.
So beautiful. Yeah,
Uh,
I'm reading The Way of Trust and Love right now by Father Jacques Philippe about it's based on the little flower, Saint Therese of Lisieux. And it was just actually the chapter that I just read this morning was about just that second one, really. Well, I guess the first two kind of go together because it's who God is as this loving father for us, and then how he views us as this beloved child that we can just climb in his lap and be held. And that was, Father Philippe is referring to some of her writings that just express this desire to stay little and climb in his lap and to approach him with that fearlessness of a child who knows that they're loved,
Yeah.
right? It
Yeah.
was just so beautiful. Yeah, that's exactly what you're talking about.
So the first big surrender I had to do started in 2010 when I was in my first marriage. I had been married 15 years at the time, and my husband declared one day that he didn't love me anymore, and he didn't think he
Mm.
ever did. So this launched this horrific sort of like 2+ year process of our divorce, a very unwanted divorce. And that surrender, I really think nearly killed me. I was not at all the woman I am today. I was a much more bound up, afraid, perfectionistic, controlling kind of version of myself. I was very Catholic. I had looked like I was everything I said I was on the outside, but
Yes.
inside, I was, holding tight to what I had to get done to make sure everything was okay, to keep us safe, this incredible intensity of anxiety and control, really.
Mm.
And so that divorce invited me to surrender that. Like that was the first time the Lord invited me to say, um, you don't have control. And in fact, you never did. And everything will be better if you can finally admit that. So that was terrible. It was horrible, as bad as anyone could imagine a divorce could be. It was. But God met me in every bit of that suffering. I was
Mm.
spiritually prepared for how to do it. I knew to turn to him. And in all of the ways I was just gutted open, he just flooded in again and again and again. And it took the words of a really holy priest. I was probably about 18 months into this process, and I was sure, I was 100% sure God would heal my marriage. I could
Mm.
do this. I would forgive. We would be triumphant. We would have a great story. It was all about me. And I just couldn't let go. I couldn't even imagine that God wouldn't do this for me. And the priest finally said to me in the confessional about 18 months in, he said, "You're the problem now. You're the problem because you won't accept that this is what God is allowing."
Mm.
And in those moments, I realized he was absolutely right. I would not surrender to what was explicitly clear to everyone but me. And I finally yielded. And in that, everything changed. How the situation did not change. Let's be clear. We still
Yes,
divorced.
right. But
But
you had been attached to the outcome that you wanted,
yes,
and you had to
I was like this.
release that.
Finally.
Yes.
And it was so sad.
Oh, I bet. I
So
can.
sad.
Yes.
And the Lord helped me lay each of my children on the altar, like under the cross, metaphorically speaking. I would
Mhm.
bring them, I would carry each one of them down the aisle, these 5 beautiful children, and I would put them on the altar, and I would envision the blood from Jesus's heart literally just like dripping onto them. That was the only thing that like allowed me to go through this process of just
Mm.
knowing the Lord was there. So that was the first just unbelievably transformational suffering, and probably, really helped me form the definition that I use for surrender, which is trusting God that because he is good, not because anything about this situation is good, right?
Mm.
Trusting God's plan with no evidence that it is good,
Yeah.
other than he is good and he's allowing it. And it was a good plan. I mean, I have given thanks so many times over and over and over and over again that he took me away from a man who was not who he said he was,
Mm.
brought me into an incredibly beautiful, holy marriage, changed me in ways that I desperately needed to be changed through that surrender. So that was sort of my first experience with it. that like just primed me to live in the world a different way. That actually life was better when I didn't have to do it exactly the way I wanted it all the time. I could be a little calmer, be a little more relaxed. But I was like just a novice at this. I was
Right.
not there yet at all. So much healing to do. Um, so, but that surrender allowed God to shatter the idol of my marriage. And that's a piece that I think is probably helpful because I do think that when we're invited to surrender, there's the material aspect of that. Like, what am I surrendering? But I think
Mhm.
it's also connected to a belief. Like we talked before we came on, like that surrender
Mm.
is attached to a belief.
Yes, it is.
I couldn't surrender because my marriage is what defined me as a good and valuable person in the world.
Yes, it's our thoughts. It's that our the story we're telling ourselves about this. Like if I'm divorced, what does that mean about me? If this happens, what does this mean? Like this is who I am. This is the story. It has to look like this. And we have all these thoughts affiliated with the circumstance that it's hard to let go of. Yeah.
I carried that scarlet D on my
Oh,
chest
wow. Yes.
for several more years before God was like, we can peel this off
Take
now.
that off.
You don't need to wear that. Um, so the next part was when I got pregnant in 2017 with our little guy, John Paul Raphael, who we were so overjoyed to be expecting. I was in the middle of my 40s. So just delighted and so excited, but found out very quickly that he had a terminal diagnosis. He was diagnosed with trisomy 18 in the womb, which is always a life-limiting condition.
Mm.
So we didn't know, we knew he would die. We didn't know if it would be in the womb. We didn't know if he would be born alive. If he was born alive, we didn't know how long he would live. So this was that next piece of surrender, right? Like, Jesus, you gave us this baby. Like with the love of my life, we now have this beautiful baby. And you're asking me immediately to hand him over again. Um, and that surrender was so, so painful. Partly because it was tied up with so much uncertainty.
Mm.
Um, the living on the fragile ice with God, the thin ice with God. Even
Yes.
though I knew when that ice cracked, he would be there, he would catch me. I never doubted that. So I could surrender. I was surrendering, but it was the spiritual was actually easy. It was not hard to surrender to God because I knew his character. I knew who he said I was. I
Mhm.
trusted him with the outcome. But humanly, it was just so painful to live with that uncertainty.
And I
Day,
think too,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. I think too, when you know, your divorce, of course, involved the suffering of your children as well as they separated from their father and they went through this upheaval in their lives. But this different kind of like physical suffering of your child is so much, it's just so much harder to bear as a mother. You sort of like, all right, I'm gonna hunker down and endure my own suffering. That's one thing. But to know that my child is or may be, if he's born alive, he will likely also be suffering too. It just adds that other layer to the experience that is so painful for us as mothers, to just endure. Like I can endure my own suffering, but there's that element, surrender again, that this is your child, God, first, and you love him more than I do, right? So he's yours, and I know that you don't want him to suffer either, but like I can't do anything to take it away from him, to stop his pain or suffering.
couldn't. Um, and the Lord is so, so good and faithful. I mean, I think when He invites us to these deep levels of surrender, He does prepare us. I mean,
Mm.
I was really prepared before my divorce, and the Lord brought me, I use the word vision. I'm a little uncomfortable with it because it sounds a little bit too mystical, but He really did give me a vision in 2016. So just a year before, it was actually 9 months before I got pregnant with John Paul. I just come back from Our Lady of Guadalupe. on a pilgrimage, healing pilgrimage. And the Lord brought me this vision of, it's kind of a long story, but the short version is I was to bring this ball of painful flesh in my hand to the foot of the cross. I dragged a ladder. I propped my ladder up and I climbed up and I literally took the flesh of my suffering and I put it right into his sacred heart.
Mm.
It was so vivid, very graphic. And I've written about it. I'd be happy to share it with you and anybody that's listening to this. I have a PDF I share freely, but this idea of my suffering only has one place to go, and it's directly into the heart of Christ. And not in this like lovely ethereal way, in a humanly graphic, bloody, tangible way,
Yes.
where I could feel the cross against my cheek as I'm climbing and putting my hand there. So this sacred surrender, I call it, that he invited me to was really a lifeline. That I was going through a hard time with one of my kids and like a custody lawsuit at that time. So I thought that's what it was for. And in fact, it was very helpful for that. But it prepared me for this huge, huge suffering the Lord was going to allow. That he could say, you know, Elizabeth, you can surrender because remember, we have this intimacy of my heart and your heart right at the cross. You know where to bring your pain. You know where to go. So that was this incredible lifeline to walk through 36 weeks and 5 days of uncertainty. John Paul was born alive. We had that incredible grace, the miracle that he was born alive. And that was all along. That was the miracle we prayed for. So God was so faithful, and he lived for 28 hours and 10 minutes before he died in our arms the next day. And I think one of the things I learned most about surrender in that time, there's so much fear. Like I was literally suffering and afraid for the entire pregnancy. All of the, I don't know, the terror, like, you know, this pain is coming.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like when you're at the dentist or like you're at the doctor's office, you're gonna have a painful procedure, like, you know, it's coming. You're so tense and afraid. But then that window of his life, like everything stopped. Like everything stopped. We just lived in joy. And what the Lord taught me about surrender in that moment is that surrender is right here, right now. Surrender isn't yesterday and it's not tomorrow. It's right now. It's being open to what the Lord is bringing to you in the present moment. And when we surrendered to the 1,690 minutes of John Paul's life, there was total peace. It was just peace and love and joy, because we were given the grace to let go of how long will he live? What's going to happen? How will I get through? That all was there. It came flooding back in. But for that present moment time, the surrender allowed there to be beauty and joy and life and love and peace in a horrible situation of my child dying. Right. But it was like heaven on earth because of the surrender, because we knew God was good, because we knew John Paul was so good, because we knew he was a gift, one that we would have to let go of. But the surrender allowed it to be so beautiful. And it didn't take away like the hard part of it. So that was just such an incredible gift. And we're so grateful that we were prepared for how to surrender to it and let it be all of the beauty and light and goodness that it could be, along with the suffering.
Yes. Well, I just have so many things coming to mind with that, because I think about, well, the first thing I thought about was that for me, well, I just think about my last pregnancy. I was 45 with our daughter, Mary Grace. And there, you know, when you have a pregnancy after a loss, there's a lot of anxiety associated with that, as you just like, you can't control it, you've lost that innocence or that naivete, that ignorance that you had. People are like, oh, it's 12 weeks, I'm at the safe space, I can tell people,
Right.
they just like, you don't even know.
It's no
um
safe
there's no
space.
safe space, no, there really isn't. So I found that for myself, because I love that you said it's in the moment. I found that I would have to do it over and over and over again. Because I'd say, okay, Jesus, I trust in you. That was my mantra. I trust in you. I trust in you, not that she's going to be okay, because she might not be. I don't have any promise of that. But I trust in you that if she's not, you still are in control and you have a plan, right? Like I have to just lay the whole plan down at your feet and be in this moment. She's here with us now. And I don't know that she'll be here with us tonight or tomorrow or next week or anything. She might not ever be in my arms, as a live child. But I trust in you anyway, that you have. And I would find that then I just gradually, it's almost like I laid it down at the cross, and then I'd like find myself being like, but I just want to hold it
Yeah.
more and control it more, but like, if I worry about it, maybe I'll have more control over it,
Yeah.
right? And it was like, no, I have to just keep putting it down. Like I want to pick it up and pretend that I can control something with my worrying, but it's like over and over. And I just found so many times in the day, I'd be like, ah, da, 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 da. Okay, no, I'm trying to pick it up again. Gotta give it to you again and again and again. And it is really in that moment. Like, and we have to do it repeatedly. We don't
No,
just do it that
minute
one
by
time.
minute by
Yes,
minute.
we don't just do it once. I wish we could and be like, okay, I decided to just give it to Jesus and I'm fine now. But I wish it could be like that. But our own nature tends to want to just keep making it about our control. But the
That-
other thing I was thinking of was both Jesus in Gethsemane saying, like, if it's possible to take this cup from me, to let this cup pass without me having to drink it, basically, right? As he's sweating blood. Like, I know what's coming. You were talking about, we know what's coming. Um, but not my will, but yours be done, right? And that verse always got me, because I thought, sometimes I would think he says, like, if you have faith like a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move. And I thought, well, how little or pathetic must my faith have been when Bridget was in the NICU and we were praying for her healing, or praying for both of the twins to be healed. And it must be indicative of a lack of faith on my part that they weren't healed, right? Because if I could move a mountain, then I could say, please heal my child, and it would work, right? It's because I had the faith. But Jesus in Gethsemane, did he not have faith that God could do it a different way, right? He, of course, had faith that it could be a different way, but he knew God's will was perfect, that way was the right way. And so it wasn't indicative of a lack of faith on Jesus's part, that the cup didn't pass from him, the suffering didn't pass him by, that he didn't have to walk through his passion, right? So just you, when you're saying, we know it's coming, I just pictured Jesus like sweating blood and saying, my soul is anxious unto death. Like, I know what's coming. I know what's coming. And can you please take it away? Please make it not be this way. But then that last line is just, it's not my will, it's your will. Like, you see the big picture, you understand all of it, and you know what's best. And that's
Well,
the,
and that's why it has to be rooted in relationship. It has to be
yes.
rooted in the intimacy that we have with God.
Mm,
Because then we know it's not a punishment. He's not cursing us. He hasn't forgotten about us. Any of these things that can happen when he allows the suffering to come. Again, our thoughts about it. But if it's rooted in relationship of his character and my belovedness, then we can have that trust that something good and beautiful will be here. I might
yeah.
have to look hard for it, or I might have to wait for it.
Hmm.
It will be there.
Yeah,
It
you're
will.
doing something here. Yeah, that I can't see, but I can't see it yet. But the fact that he sees eternity and we see this, right? Like it's just being able to trust like a child who only has their own little perception of things and we as the parent know more. It's being able to trust that God sees and knows more and knows how he's going to incorporate this into his plan.
Uh,
Oh, so
so
good.
the book that I ended up writing about John Paul's life you shared is Let Yourself Be Loved, and the subtitle is Big Lessons from a Little Life. And
Mm,
each chapter has a little nugget that we learned through walking this journey of suffering with him. But one of them, I don't remember which chapter it is, but the subtext is the miracle you get isn't always the miracle you prayed for.
yes. Oh,
And that was so incredible for me because it doesn't mean God's not on the throne. He is working a miracle here. But just because I'm not, his vision is so much bigger. Like I prayed for my marriage to be saved. That didn't happen. Look at the miracles that came because my marriage was not saved.
mm,
Right? Something so much bigger that I couldn't ever have dreamed of. My life with my husband, this beautiful baby, the work of ministry that the Lord's inviting me to, all came from a divorce
yeah, you wouldn't have
I
had any
didn't
of
want
that.
to happen, right? Um,
Yes.
and that has also been true of John Paul Raphael's death, that surrendering allowed the Lord to flood in. And there's a passage in the book, if you don't mind, I always keep it
No, I
earmarked.
do.
I think it's really, I think it's really relevant to this process of surrender. And it's spoiler, it's near the back. um, I prayed endlessly for a miracle and my own happy ending when my first husband left. I was convinced the Lord would do that for me. There was no miracle. Or was there? My heart whispers. Was the miracle his presence? That God never left my side and led me to something even better? I see that now. But how could I ever imagine then that divorce would be the path to a richer and more joyful life? It would lead me to Ralph and our crazy family. That divorce led me to John Paul Raphael. I remember the words I spoke at his funeral. The miracle you get isn't always the miracle you pray for. What if this time the miracle wasn't that John Paul Raphael was healed, but that I was?
Mm,
And that's really getting a little choked up. Like
me
that's
too.
really what the Lord has shown me, that in surrender, we make space for him to heal us through very painful circumstances.
Mm,
And they might be huge and painful, and they also could be like irritating and annoying,
mhm.
right? But like we're still surrendering to them. Do you have time for me to share one more?
Of course.
Okay, so the third big surrender. So when I think about John Paul, if my marriage was the first one was like the idol of my marriage, I think with John Paul, the thought, the healing came from really the idea that my life that I was valuable not because of this baby, that my marriage to Ralph was valuable not because we had children to prove it. There was
Mm,
a little bit of being a second wife. There was a sense of like woundedness that I still was like out to prove something, that God was really inviting me to lay down. And I thought that the idol that had been shattered there was my motherhood.
mm,
But it wasn't, maybe like cracked it a little bit, but it hadn't been shattered really until 2020, 2 years later, when a situation came. I think I've hinted at the fact that my divorce was not a good one. 14 years later, it's still hostile at best with my ex-husband. Um, and in 2020, my fourth child, he was 14 years old at the time, wanted to go live with his dad. And this was not the first time a child had wanted to go live with their dad, but like my ex-husband had left the faith, like values and morals that were not at all one that a Catholic mother would agree with or support. And I had fought for years. Every child that wanted to go live, I was like, nope, that's not what we're doing. But this time, when my son, not very graciously and not very kindly and doing it all of the wrong ways,
mm,
was pushing to go live with his dad, I was praying about it and I heard the Lord say, let him go.
mm,
And I was like, are you crazy? No. Like he's already making all these bad choices. I know that I have every reason to expect there will be more going on. And I gathered my tribe of faithful Catholic women and we prayed. And I said, why is God telling me yes? And they all said, I don't know, but I'm getting yes too. Like, I think you have to do this. And so the Lord asked me to surrender again. And this time was really different because I had control. I didn't have to let it happen. I actually got to choose.
Mm,
I couldn't choose with John Paul. This was happening whether
right.
I wanted it or not. The same with the divorce, not my plan. But this time, God invited me to cooperate. He said, you don't have to do this, but I'm asking you to. I'm
Mm.
asking you to trust me. And it was horrible. It was not a graceful surrender, but I said, oh, okay, all right. And I told my son, and he moved out, and I didn't see him for like 6 months. And I wish I could say it was graceful and dignified. It wasn't. I like cried and wailed and lamented and yelled and like slobbered and snotted all over God for the whole summer. Um, and it was exactly what that child needed.
Wow.
He's at the Air Force Academy now. He's coming back to his faith. We have a great relationship.
So he didn't leave and come. I thought you were going to say he had a
Oh,
terrible experience and he left and came back.
no, he
But
left. He
in
stayed
that
with his
experience,
dad for all
oh,
of high school, and it
it was
tortured.
what he needed.
It was what he needed.
And
You
God
know,
asked you to
high
trust
school
him
by
with it.
my ex-husband's house, that high school had junior ROTC for the Air Force. And that is what turned that kid's life around and launched him into a whole nother path and dimension of leadership and manhood.
That God wanted for him
God wanted for him.
and asked you to participate in.
Asked me to participate in it. And like, so that surrender really shattered that
Mm,
idol of motherhood, because a good mother, a good Catholic mother would not let her kid go do this, right? And God
right.
said, trust me, surrender to me.
Mm. That's hitting home for me right now because goodness, girl.
Me too.
Um, because I homeschool my children, but our 14-year-old um has been asking to go to school. And we don't have a good Catholic school around here that's we can afford or that's close enough. And so he was asking if he could go to the public school. And there is that like, but we're Catholic, like, there is that same idea of what a good Catholic mother does. And but at the same time, I toured the school with him, and I know that he is a child who like he has very high functioning autism, but like structure really he thrives. He thrives in it. And we don't necessarily have that at home. It's like someone's sick, it's kind of a little, we have our routine, but it's not as structured, I would say. And he loves it. He's in the Civil Air Patrol. He did like sort of a boot camp, and they're up at 6:30 and they're doing PT and they're working all day and the lights out at 9 and very regimented, right? And he loved it. I mean, there's room inspections and you have to have your clothes all orderly and everything. He's he's nailing it. And his room is a disaster area. So I'm like, you are nailing that. How is that working? But this is our first week of school this week. So he's gone and
Ah.
doing this but I just felt like somehow I feel like this is what he's supposed to do. I think this would could be good for him. Let's put it that way. It could be good, and we're covering it with prayers and we're just surrendering it and saying, God, you can work there too. You can meet him there. And I just like that you said that it's just like speaking exactly to our experience this very week as we are um going through that. But yeah, oh my goodness. Yeah, that's so beautiful. I love, and then that's the path he had him on. And now he's coming back to the faith. You're coming back to your relationship, and God wanted to do it that way.
Well, and it also, I mean, that was the path for my son, but the path for me was this incredible freedom and this was true all along, I just didn't get it, that not only was it not my responsibility to get everything exactly right with my kids, it was never my job to. Like, I get to show up in love, and yes, we do all the things we're supposed to do and introduce them to the Lord and the sacraments and all of this goodness. But if that doesn't go the way I want it to, it's not my fault. I couldn't have fixed it. Like
Uh,
they are their own people living their own lives. And the freedom that came when I finally realized, like, oh, like I don't have to bear this incredible burden of making everything right for them.
mm,
I I can't, and I'm not supposed to.
yeah.
I
And we're
need
just,
to
oh, go
love
ahead.
them and be love to them.
Yes.
And obviously you don't do this with 8-year-olds, like, but when they
No, no,
get
no. Right.
teenagers, like they have freedom and we get to love them through that freedom. There may be boundaries that have to be put in place, but that surrender allowed me to realize that like motherhood was so much, it's not my sole identity. It is not my primary identity. And if I failed at it, which I didn't, but if I did, I would still be beloved.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
So letting go of surrendering all of those pieces that get in the way of living in freedom.
Yeah. And we're just coming off, we're recording this at the end of August. So we just had St. Monica and St. Augustine's feast day, right? And so one of my sons, not the one who's going to school, but one of them has St. Augustine as his confirmation saint. But yeah, the thought just occurs to me that the Holy Spirit is leading them, right? Like that surrender is also to the fact that their path might not be the one we envisioned for them, but God's still holding them in his hand, right? He's still holding them. And it was St. Augustine's like trying to find rest, trying to find peace, trying to fill the void through all of those other things that finally made him so convinced that God was the source of all of that. And, look at the amazing contribution he made to the church, but he needed to go through that search for all of those other things first.
Mhm.
And then the example of his mother just letting him do it. I mean, she didn't really have a choice, right? As he's a grown person, a grown man, but and
Mhm.
just consistently praying for him. And that's what we can do as mothers. And that's what we need to let them do within reason as children and just trust that he has a plan for
Mhm.
that too. Yeah.
Sure.
Ah, so good.
So good. Praise
So
God.
good. Yeah. And then, right. So we touched on who are we surrendering to? Who am I as a beloved child that this is how God views me. And then just the redemptive, we both talked about this before we hit record, just that our suffering, you for your divorce, but also for me, it was the loss of the twins, but there had been suffering before that. But I think that when we have that intense suffering, it's like the Fixer Upper show, right? Like we see them just gut this house, and as they're breaking it open, they realize, oh, it needs all new pipes, it needs all new electricity too, right? And so this suffering just broke us open in a way that we may never have been able to be broken open before. And while we're in there, we might as well fix this unhealthy thing and this unhealthy thing. And it feels like so much pain because it's just rebuilding us. But then the product is always amazing, right? I mean, I love that show. But both of us were saying that we felt ourselves that the outcome or the product that God had created in us through that tearing apart of what was not good, what wasn't meant to be there, or what he wanted to use to heal us, that product is one that we probably wouldn't exchange for not going through the suffering.
And I think one final barrier, perhaps, I mean, I'm thinking about surrender is that, we're called to surrender anything that stands between us and the promises the Lord has for us, right?
Mhm.
Peace of God that surpasses all understanding.
Right.
Anything that keeps us from living in the freedom of his beloved daughters. Um, and sometimes the things we're asked to surrender, we've talked about many of them. It's so hard because we think we're giving up. Like
Yeah.
maybe it feels like this is something that I care so much about, like I'm letting it go. Like it all of a sudden, maybe it means I don't care about it anymore. And in fact, what I've really come to understand is that surrender is not saying it doesn't matter. It's saying it matters so much that I want the almighty king of the universe to take care of it,
Absolutely.
not me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember vividly that after our second twin, Bridget, died, um, I forget if somebody had given me a prayer book or the phrase resignation to God's will was there. I forget if it was in a book or if it was in just a friend gave me a little packet of prayers, but and I thought about that word resignation, and in my mind it was almost like synonymous with quitting, right? Like when you resign from a job, you're just like, I'm done, And I always thought of it in a negative connotation, just like I can't do this anymore, like I give up. But then I just realized, I remember just having the awareness that that's exactly what it was. It was just going, you take it, you do it. You know, you're the only one who can do it. I never actually could, but it was just that willing giving up of the control. That's what it was. It was that quitting, trying to control it all, resigning from trying to be in charge of it and make it happen the way I wanted it to, right? And going, you are the only one who was in control to begin with. And I just need to really just let you handle it. And that was exactly the impression that I got when I read those prayers, and I just thought resignation, what an interesting word. And it was like, oh yeah, like I
Well,
do
and
need to quit something.
you then have the freedom to have joy in the midst of it then.
Yeah, it was freeing. That's what it was. I just felt like it was me sort of giving up, like, oh well, I guess I can't do anything, so you do it. But then I realized it was freeing. It was freeing to say, wait, you saw the whole, it's like this after having all these surgeries and this hospital stay and everything, it was like a little bacterial infection that she ended up dying from. And for a minute it felt like, did you turn away? Like, what, did you miss it? Where were you? But then I realized, like, no, 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 like nothing happens without your will. Like nothing happens. That didn't happen when you were sleeping or looking away or you
Off
missed
the
it.
job for a little while.
Yeah, yeah, you hadn't clocked out. But and then it was like, wait, if you knew and you could control that, then like all of it must be in your control. It must have been from the start, and it was like, oh, I could just let go of trying to it didn't mean that all of a sudden my pain went away, right? It doesn't make our pain go away, but it was just letting him have it, and even giving the pain to him and just saying like, okay, this must be part of the plan too. This pain, this suffering.
Well, and that's another one of those little lessons in my book that like our sufferings are an invitation to joy.
Yeah.
It's God inviting us to say, let's come to a deeper level of surrender together through this suffering. And then you're going to have a greater capacity for joy and you can live in freedom and joy all the time,
Mhm.
despite your circumstances. And, and the let yourself be loved, it was that I learned how to let God love me through not just John Paul's life, but through his death. It was his dying and my surrender to that entire process that I learned how much the Lord really loved me. I
Mhm.
began to let him love me through that and through the subsequent healing that we talked about. All
Sure.
trauma opens the door to past trauma. So I was like, here I am, like cracked open on the floor, and God's like, let's clean up those other parts of the house. Let's get in there.
While we're in here, yeah.
Let's clean it up. And so he just loved me so beautifully through that,
Yes.
through this life and through his life, but mostly through the death and the suffering. So um, surrender leads to such beauty
It
and
really does.
peace and joy, really. So
Yeah.
it's not easy. I don't want to make it light,
No, no,
but
no,
it's
no.
completely worth it.
It's worth it.
Completely worth it.
Yes. It's
Because you can't ever stop the suffering in life. So we're never going to be able to stop the sufferings, but we can, through surrender, make something not just be terrible, it can be terrible and beautiful. It can be
Yeah,
terrible.
it's Jesus saying, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. Like it's not just about the trouble. There's more, and I've got it.
Yeah.
Oh, Elizabeth, so good. It's so good to talk to you, and thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Tell us, where can people find you and your
Sure.
ministry?
So yeah, so Redbird, we're at redbird.love, Love. You can find everything there online, and you can find me. I have two different choices, elizabethleon.org or thejourneyofthebeloved.com. And there's links to my book, which I love because it's about my baby and
Yeah.
God and suffering
That
and
was
surrender.
that was a hard to get through for me because
Yeah.
it was written so well that I was right in that moment with you and sobbing with you as I was, but I mean, beautiful. Like I was just like, yes, like you captured so well the experiences that some of them we had both shared. So yeah, it was just so beautiful. So, all right, I'll put links to these things in the notes for the show. And I just thank you so much for joining me today and talking about surrender.
Pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the invitation, and perhaps we will collaborate together again.
I would love that. All right, take care. Bye. Elizabeth Leon is joining me today on the show, and I am so happy to connect with her. Elizabeth is the Director of Family Support for Redbird Ministries, but she also has her own ministry called The Journey of the Beloved. And she's the author of a book called Let Yourself Be Loved. So, Elizabeth, it's so nice to have you here with me. Why don't you just share with us a little bit about where you're from and what where's your family from? Where do you live?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, we've connected a couple different times over the years, and it's a
Yep.
pleasure. I'm glad to get to know you more. I'm physically in Northern Virginia.
Hmm.
I'm a wife and a mother, Catholic writer, speaker, musician. That's the smallest of the three for sure. And I live here with my husband, Ralph, and we have 10 children between us. We're in a second marriage. I brought in five, he brought in four, and then we have our little boy, John Paul Raphael, who died in 2018 and is really the springboard and the heart of all of the ministry work that I now do. We have four grandbabies and one on the way, a couple cats. So life is full, and we're actually,
Yes.
I can say, in a very peaceful season with two
Mhm.
families of trauma bringing a lot of hurt and broken kids together. It has not always been calm, but we are in a relatively calm season. I have one child at home still. She's a senior in high school.
Wow. Okay. My oldest is a senior, so I'm just like, I'm right.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, they range right now. Our living kids range from 17 to 34 and pretty much
Wow.
everything in the middle.
Amazing.
Um,
Amazing.
yeah, and like as you mentioned, I'm the director of family support for Redbird Ministries, which is a Catholic grief support ministry for families of child loss, all ages from pregnancy loss through adulthood. We serve so many people all over the country, all over the world, and we work both in diocese. We have chapters that exist within a diocese, or we also have a virtual family pathway. If you don't have on the ground support near you, you can connect with us. And we have
Mm.
lots and lots of different ways to find support, including our upcoming Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day event that you will be speaking
Yes.
at.
Yes. Yeah. October is always just a special time to offer support for those families that have been through that experience, as we both have. But today the topic for this month of September is surrender. I prayed about these topics before I came into the year, and for some reason, September and surrender went together. I imagine a little bit might have something to do with Our Lady of Sorrows and that being her month and her example for us. But you jumped on that topic and said that that's a good one for me.
That's
So
my one.
that's the one I want to talk about. So I would love to understand more a little bit about why surrender is just so meaningful to you and a part of your story.
Sure. Okay. So surrender. In order to surrender, I think you have to have three things in place. And then I'll dive into
Hmm.
how I got to be so passionate about it. You really need to know, first of all, who you're surrendering to. You need to have a good sense of who is God, who's his character, what's his character. Um, so knowing the Father, first of all, and then secondly, knowing who you are to him. like really grounding your identity as the beloved son or daughter of God.
Mm.
So those two things have to be that you have to start with that. I feel like it's nearly impossible to have authentic surrender unless you can begin with those. The promise of who God is and who does he say I am. And then finally, the third piece is redemptive suffering. That my suffering matters. There's a purpose. It's hard to surrender to something if I think it's meaningless, if all it is agony and pain. So, our Redbird podcast is called It's Not for Nothing. So the third one is really, it's not for nothing. It's the power of redemptive suffering. So it is worth surrendering to this because in that process, fruit will come from it, grace will come from it, and not just for us, for all
Yes,
those that we love. So those are sort of my like prerequisites to get into
absolutely.